As a second-year medical resident back then, I used to believe the most disturbing things I'd ever witness would happen inside hospital walls, behind swinging doors, under fluorescent lights, surrounded by monitors and alarms. I was wrong. This happened 5 years ago, on an ordinary weekday night after a long shift at the emergency department. I remember it clearly because nothing about that day felt unusual. I was just exhausted, hungry, and quietly relieved that I was finally heading home. My name is Daniel. At the time, I worked at a downtown hospital in the city. Sirens were background noise. Trauma was routine. You learn to compartmentalize quickly in medicine, see the worst of people's lives, then step outside and keep walking. That night, I left the hospital a little after 11 p.m. The streets were damp from an earlier drizzle, traffic lights reflecting off the asphalt. I took my usual route home, expecting nothing more than a slow drive and a few hours of restless sleep. The cool night breeze on the skin while driving is often a relief. A few blocks from an intersection under construction, traffic suddenly slowed to a crawl. At first, I thought it was another accident. Then I saw the flashing lights. A police cruiser sat at an awkward angle in the road, blocking one lane. Ahead of it, a sedan was stopped with its hazard lights on. 2 young men stood near the driver's side door, clearly arguing with the officer. Something about the tension pulled my attention in. Even from inside my car, I could sense how close the situation was to tipping over. And then, in a matter of seconds, it did. The officer stood with his feet planted wide, one hand resting near his holster. He wasn't shouting, but his voice carried the kind of authority that leaves no room for discussion. The driver, maybe mid-20s, looked shaken, hands raised halfway, palms open. His friend stood a few steps back, pacing, clearly furious. I watched the scene inch closer through my windshield as traffic crept forward. Windows rolled down. People leaned out of cars. The city does that, turns real danger into something spectators think they understand. The pacing man shouted something I couldn't hear. His voice cracked with frustration. He threw his hands up, turned, then suddenly stepped forward toward the officer, as if to argue his point face to face. That was when everything went wrong. The officer's posture changed instantly. Shoulders tightened. Hand dropped to his weapon and he pulled the trigger. There was a sharp, unmistakable sound, the safety disengaging. I remember shouting, "No," as the gun went off. The noise was deafening, louder than I thought it would be, echoing between buildings. The young man jerked violently, as if shoved from behind, then collapsed onto the pavement. For a split second, no one moved. The city itself seemed stunned into silence. Then panic exploded. Someone screamed. A car horn blared endlessly. The driver dropped to his knees beside his friend, shouting his name, his voice breaking apart with each word. Blood spread fast. I was already opening my door. I shouted that I was a doctor as I ran forward, my shoes skidding on wet asphalt. The officer stood frozen, gun still raised, eyes wide, breathing hard. He kept saying something, words tumbling over each other, but I couldn't hear them over the ringing in my ears. The wounded man was gasping, eyes unfocused, hands twitching weakly. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the air. I pressed down on the wound with both hands, trying to slow the bleeding. "Stay with me," I said, more like a command. "Don't close your eyes." His friend sobbed beside us, hands shaking, begging me not to let him die. People crowded closer, phones raised. Someone handed me a hoodie. I wrapped it tight, applying pressure, feeling the warmth soak through the fabric. The officer paced a few steps away now, repeating the same phrase again and again. He rushed me. But I had watched his hands. They had been empty. Sirens finally cut through the chaos. Paramedics arrived, pushed through the crowd, and took over with quick, practiced movements. They loaded the young man onto a stretcher, oxygen mask fogging as he struggled to breathe. As they rushed him away, his eyes locked onto mine. I still see that look sometimes. Confused. Afraid. Like he was trying to understand how a conversation had turned into a gunshot. The scene dissolved quickly after that. Police tape. Questions. Statements. I gave mine calmly, clinically, like I was presenting a case, not reliving a trauma. I went home long after midnight, hands still stained. The news broke the story the next morning. According to the report, the officer had been threatened. According to the headline, the victim had charged. According to the footage, the moment before the shot was conveniently blurred by bodies and angles. None of it matched what I saw. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was the fact that the man survived because someone stopped to help before he bled out. For over a year after that, I flinched every time I saw police lights. My chest tightened during traffic stops, even when I wasn't the one being pulled over. I hated that feeling. Hated what it was turning me into. Even now, years later, when traffic slows unexpectedly at night, I find myself scanning the road ahead. Watching moves. Listening to tone. I learned something that night I was never taught in medical school, to stay out of trouble. As much as possible, because even with witnesses everywhere, somehow, the truth can still be twisted, and once a life is wasted, it's gone forever, for nothing. My name is Marcus Hale. This incident happened about 4 years ago when I was on my way home with my friends. Even now, I don't talk about that night easily. Ethan and Matt were my closest friends back then. Ethan was the dependable one, the kind of guy who never panicked behind the wheel. Matt talked his way through life with a grin and a joke. And me, I noticed things. I always had. Patterns. Silences. That's probably why the memory still claws at me. We were driving back from a party outside the city. It was after 1 a.m. The highway emptied into the forest. No streetlights. No houses. Just black pine walls on both sides. Then out of nowhere the lights came on. Red and blue, flashing in the rearview mirror. Ethan slowed immediately. I wasn't speeding, he said. The cruiser didn't use a siren. It just stayed close. Watching and flashing lights. That alone set my nerves on edge. We pulled over. Gravel popped beneath the tires. The engine idled, loud and exposed. The night was unnaturally still. A door opened. Heavy footsteps approached. A tall officer stepped into view, face hidden by the brim of his hat. His flashlight swept across the car, and stopped on me. He smiled. "Well now," he said quietly. "That's interesting." Every muscle in my body tightened. He asked routine questions, but his tone wasn't routine at all. When he told me to step out of the car, Ethan objected. The officer shut that down fast. Outside, the air felt thick. He circled me slowly, eyes cold, amused. Then he said there'd been reports of suspicious activity nearby. Said we needed to follow him for a check. Claimed it was standard procedure. Fear made us compliant. We followed him off the highway onto a dirt road that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Branches scraped the car. Dust choked the air. My phone lost signal. "This isn't right," I whispered. Ethan didn't answer, but I could see his hands shaking. The cruiser stopped deep in the woods. The officer got out, but stayed where he was. He raised his hand. From the trees, armed men emerged. Reality hit us at once. This wasn't a stop. It was a trap. Ethan reacted before any of us could think. He slammed the gas, swerved around the cruiser, and the forest exploded with gunshots. Shattering glass. Screeching tires. We burst back onto the highway and didn't stop until we finally reached a town. We went straight to the police station. They came with us. And that's the part that still haunts me. The dirt road was there. Our tire tracks were there. Shell casings littered the ground, fresh, unmistakable. The broken remains of our rear window glittered in the dirt. But the men were gone. No footprints leading away. No vehicles. No sign of where they disappeared to. And the cruiser the officer had driven was gone. There were marks where it had been parked. Oil stains. Crushed leaves. But no car. The officers went quiet after that. They ran the description. They ran the plate number Ethan remembered. It belonged to a cruiser retired over a decade ago, after an officer vanished during a night patrol in that same forest. The case was quietly closed. No suspects. No explanations. But every now and then, when I'm driving late and the road goes empty, I catch myself checking the mirror. Because one can't be too careful. I used to enjoy driving at night. That might sound strange to some people, but night drives were my escape. The roads were quieter, the air felt calmer, and for a while, it felt like the world belonged only to me. No traffic. No noise. Just the hum of the engine and my thoughts keeping me company. My name is Laura. At the time this happened, I was working late shifts at a distribution center on the edge of the city. Nothing glamorous, just long hours, repetitive work, and fatigue. Still, I never dreaded the drive home. If anything, it was the best part of my day. This happened about 2 years ago. I remember the night clearly because it was the last time I ever enjoyed being on the road after midnight. My shift ended a little after 1 a.m. I was exhausted, but not the kind of exhausted where you're nodding off, just drained. The parking lot was mostly empty when I got into my car. I rolled down the windows for a bit of cool air and turned the radio on low. Soft music. Familiar songs. Enough to keep my mind engaged. The route home was one I'd taken countless times. A stretch of city road that slowly thinned out into quieter areas, old buildings, patches of trees, long gaps between streetlights. Lonely, yes, but never alarming. I was less than 20 minutes from home. The road ahead was empty, and my headlights cut cleanly through the dark. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt, how still. Then my headlights caught something ahead. At first, I thought it was a shadow. Maybe a trick of the light as the road curved slightly. My brain tried to dismiss it before it fully formed. Then I realized it was standing upright. Someone was in the middle of the road. My heart jumped straight into my throat. I slammed my foot on the brake, breath catching as the shape grew clearer in front of me. It looked like an old woman, thin, slightly bent forward, standing completely still. She wore something long and light-colored that reflected my headlights in a strange, dull way. Her hair hung down around her face, messy and pale. She wasn't waving for help. She wasn't moving. She was just standing there, directly in my lane. There was no time to think. No time to ask questions. I swerved. The tires screeched as I jerked the wheel to avoid her, my car skidding just enough to make my stomach drop. For one terrifying second, I was sure I was going to lose control. The only thought in my head was how lucky I was that no car was behind me. Then I was past her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car straight. My heart pounded in my ears, and I could feel tears springing up out of pure shock. "Oh my God," I whispered, barely hearing my own voice. Instinctively, I checked the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No woman. No figure. Nothing. I stared harder, leaning forward, scanning the asphalt illuminated by my taillights. I checked the side mirrors. I slowed down, almost stopping. There was no one there. A cold, crawling sensation spread through my chest. I told myself she must have moved. Maybe she stepped back into the darkness. Maybe I imagined how close she was. Fatigue can play tricks on your eyes, right? But the more I tried to reason it out, the worse it felt. I didn't stop the car. I don't know why. Fear, maybe. Or some instinct telling me that stopping would be a mistake. I pressed the gas and kept driving. The music on the radio crackled with sudden static, sharp and loud enough to make me flinch. I reached out to turn it down, realizing my hands were trembling. For the rest of the drive, I felt watched. Every shadow on the side of the road made my pulse spike. Every reflection in the mirror felt wrong, like it didn't quite belong. I drove faster than usual, desperate to reach the familiar lights of my neighborhood. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing in on me. I barely slept that night. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A momentary lapse. A shadow shaped by exhaustion. I avoided thinking about it too much. But a week later, curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of me. I drove that same road in broad daylight. I slowed down at the exact spot where it had happened. There were no houses nearby. No bus stops. No intersections. Nothing that would explain why someone, especially an elderly woman, would be standing in the middle of the road at night. And then I saw it. A dark mark on the asphalt. Faint, but noticeable. Right where she had been standing. It looked less like a spill and more like something that had soaked into the road itself. I stopped driving that route after that. Eventually, I stopped driving at night altogether. To this day, I don't know what I saw. I don't know if my mind betrayed me for a split second, or if exhaustion got the better of me. But what haunts me the most isn't the fear. It's how still she was. Not startled. Not confused. Just waiting. And I can't stop wondering. If I hadn't swerved, would she have disappeared then, too?